Russian leader Vladimir Putin is experiencing the most difficult days of his leadership period in Ukraine since the Russian army, shaken by the recent big offensive plans of the Ukrainian army, cannot show enough strength on the battlefield. Putin is resorting to reinforcements. As we all know, these units are mainly the mercenaries of the Wagner Group fighting on Ukraine's eastern front lines and the troops of the Chechen leader, Ramzan Kadyrov. However, threats that the Wagner Group boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin, would withdraw his mercenaries from Bakhmut brought the advance of the Russian army in the city to a standstill, benefiting the Ukrainian forces. Russian attacks on Bakhmut have now drastically decreased, while Vladimir Putin was looking for solutions to get out of this situation. This time, Wagner leader Prigozhin suggested that Kadyrov's soldiers fill the shortage in Bakhmut. Yevgeny Prigozhin argued that Kadyrov's troops should support the Wagner forces, who retreated to Bakhmut's central front lines. This situation has led to the beginning of a new crisis for the Russians. Now, a new relocation proposal has confused the Donetsk line as Putin struggles to halt the Ukrainian advance on the front lines in and around Bakhmut and turn the situation around. After the decisions to relocate between Wagner forces and Kadyrov's soldiers, the Ukrainians took the necessary precautions and built defensive fortifications on the front lines and placed their reserve troops in the most strategic areas. Additionally, the Ukrainian army deployed its special forces to critical front lines such as Bakhmut and Marinka. Following this relocation decision between Wagner and Kadyrov, units in Marinka, the 1st Battalion, and the 1st Tank Brigade from the 1st Army of Ukraine were waiting for the Wagner forces of Ukraine's Elite Dar Battalion and Azov Regiment to replace the Kadyrov units on the Bakhmut front line. In short, all preparations were made by the Ukrainians. Kadyrov ordered his soldiers to be killed to prove himself to Putin and to push Prigozhin into a more non-combat passive position. The Chechen leader mobilized his fighters to carry out offensive operations both on the Donetsk front line and in Zaporizhia. Kadyrov sent the elite Chechen Akhmat battalion to Bakhmut and Marinka. Kadyrov had great confidence in this military unit. We think that Putin also wanted to trust the Akhmat battalion. Upon this order, Kadyrov's Akhmat battalion launched simultaneous attacks on the Bakhmut, Tavria, and Marinka front lines. These unplanned attacks did not benefit much due to the defensive measures taken by the Ukrainians. The situation towards Tavria has not changed significantly in the last 24 hours. In the past day, Kadyrov's Akhmat battalion has attacked our Ukrainian positions 13 times, but the Ukrainian defense forces managed to repel all these attacks. Ukraine was prepared to attack the pro-Russian Chechens while Kadyrov's Chechens were trying to make a sudden raid. They faced pressure from the battalion from the front and the Azov regiment from the flanks. The only option for the pro-Russian elite Chechen battalion was to retreat, and it was even claimed that the Akhmat battalion suffered losses during the retreat. As a result of the conflicts in the region, the Russian army lost more than 500 soldiers in one day. In addition, Wagner troops who were trying to escape from Bakhmut were ambushed by the Ukrainian army, resulting in over 100 casualties. The successful defense and attack of the 1st Army of Ukraine, ADR, and Azov battalions in the direction of Bakhmut, Marinka, and Tavria inflicted a heavy defeat on Putin, Kadyrov, and Prigozhin's troops. The most striking aspect was the elimination of at least 2 detachments from the elite Kadyrov units, approximately 100 members of the Chechen Akhmat battalion. While Kadyrov's most elite troops suffered a fiasco, Valery Churkin, spokesperson for the Joint Press Center of the Ukrainian Tavria Direction Defense Forces, reported that in addition to these attacks of the Akhmat battalion, the Russians carried out an airstrike on the town of Orikhiv and bombed a total of 20 settlements in the Zaporizhia region. More than 90 attacks were recorded in the area of responsibility in the Zaporizhia region and 249 in the Donetsk region over the past day. The missile and artillery units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces belonging to the Tavria direction carried out 832 firing missions in the last day. The attacks in Tavria were repulsed thanks to the artillery attacks of the Ukrainians and the Azov regiment. In other words, in the first place, Kadyrov's Akhmat battalion could not achieve what he hoped for, and Russian leader Vladimir Putin became increasingly enraged. However, the absence of any response from Russia on this issue reminded of the dead silence. Because before these attacks occurred, Akhmet Kadyrov was very confident in his unit and was making plans without a doubt that he would succeed. Besides the fiasco at Tavria, Kadyrov's troops were also conducting offensive operations on the Bakhmut front line to support Wagner's forces. However, as we mentioned, the Ukrainian army took serious security and defense measures in Bakhmut and did not withdraw its special forces from the city. Ukraine's Adar battalion and Azov regiment repulsed the attacks of Kadyrov's soldiers and counterattacked. The commander of the land forces of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Colonel General Oleksiy Enderkursky, reported that the battalion members destroyed Russian soldiers, Kadyrov's troops, and Prigozhin's mercenaries in the trenches in the direction of Bakhmut with the help of unmanned aerial vehicles. Additionally, the Ukrainian defenders eliminated 107 Russian soldiers in the direction of Bakhmut, destroyed 3 ammunition depots, and a large number of Russian combat vehicles. The total number of losses suffered by Russia during the attempts to capture Bakhmut exceeded 40,000. These striking casualty reports increase the desperation of Russian leader Vladimir Putin. On the other hand, it is quite remarkable that the Ukrainian army is still victorious despite fighting against 3 different military units in Bakhmut, creating a shock effect in the Kremlin while Putin remains silent about this issue. Why does Putin tolerate this situation? It was already anticipated that the relocation between Wagner's forces and Kadyrov's troops would give the Ukrainian forces an advantage, because if you withdraw troops accustomed to the region during ongoing war clashes, you will undoubtedly face obstacles if you include new warriors instead. But in this case, neither Putin nor Prigozhin had another chance, because considering that the Wagner forces lost about 40,000 mercenaries in and around Bakhmut, it is unlikely that the Wagner group could provide sufficient military support to the Russian army. Therefore, a new military reinforcement was essential for Russia on the Bakhmut and other Donetsk front lines. When we look at the situation from Putin's point of view, we understand that things are much more desperate because the Russian leader knows that such a situation can only harm him unless he has lost his mind. However, the state of the Wagner group is clear. Therefore, the Russian leader was forced to watch helplessly as Kadyrov's troops dispersed to Ukraine's eastern front lines. But this silence of the Russian leader, of course, had consequences. After Prigozhin withdrew his mercenaries and asked for support from Kadyrov, the failures of the Bakhmut battalion in Tavria inevitably led to negative situations. Additionally, the situation completely reversed when the battalion resisted both the Kadyrov and Wagner forces and the soldiers of the Russian army in the city of Bakhmut, counterattacking and breaking through the Russian front lines. After all this, the attention now turns to Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin and Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov. Following the failures, hostility emerged between the head of the Wagner group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, and Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, 2 of Russian President Vladimir Putin's most important allies. Adam Delimkonov, a close ally of Kadyrov, attacked Prigozhin on the Telegram channel after Wagner group boss claimed that the Chechen Bakhmut battalion lacked the capacity to occupy Ukraine's self-proclaimed Donetsk Republic region. On May 31st, Prigozhin, through the press service of his company, Concord, made a statement about the Chechen combat troops under the command of Bakhmut Kadyrov, noting that the battalion has the potential to occupy certain areas, but not the entire region. Another close ally of Kadyrov, chairman of the Chechen parliament Magom Dodov, reacted sharply to Prigozhin for his daily statements, claiming they had created an atmosphere of panic among the Russian people. But from the very beginning, Kadyrov had offered to take over the clash mission in Bakhmut. Prigozhin replied that the Bakhmut battalion would undoubtedly take Bakhmut. Now, the Wagner leaders claim that Kadyrov did not see enough potential in his soldiers, which has caused a violent confrontation between the Wagner and Kadyrov groups. The extent of the war between Russia and Ukraine now worries even Moscow leader Vladimir Putin. The main reason for this is the air attacks in Russia, the constant flights of unmanned aerial vehicles in the Russian airspace. And this situation creates a socio-psychological tension throughout Russia. These attacks often targeted cities close to the Ukrainian land border or between the Crimea and Russian border lines. Cities such as Krasnodar, Rostov, Bryansk and Belgorod were among the regions where the attacks were intense. While the targeting of these cities with offensive actions led to the evacuation of Russian citizens, such situations also gradually reduced the trust in the Moscow administration. The Russian citizens who started to feel the war at home began to understand much better the extent of the fire surrounding Russia with these attacks. In addition, the attacks on Russian cities created chaos, panic, and tension lines in these cities. One of the actions that sparked this tension was the attacks in Belgorod. If you remember, the Free Russian Legion group fighting for the Ukrainian army infiltrated the Russian city of Belgorod and carried out an incredible offensive operation. Belgorod Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov reported that many people were injured during the clashes, including 2 who were evacuated from their homes. In addition, the Russian FSB building was also hit in the attack and suffered a lot of damage. This dramatic raid led Moscow to declare a counterterrorism operation, giving the authorities special powers to restrict communications and public movements. Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov announced the evacuation of people in many villages and warned those who had fled their homes not to return yet because the Russian forces were very worried about this attack. Security measures in Belgorod continued for 24 hours. According to local officials, temporary shelters have been set up for about 9,300 displaced people in the Grayvarnsky district. Russian officials thought that the voices would be silenced after this attack. However, after the operation carried out by the Russian legions, activity began in the Rostov region near Krasnodar. One of the Russian cities, Russian air defense systems, went on alert after the Ukrainian drone and missile attack in Rostov. The governor of the Rostov Oblast in the Russian Federation, Vasily Golubev, claimed that the Russian air defense shot down a Ukrainian missile in the Morozovsk region where there is a military airspace. Ukrainian military channels reported an attack on the airport. In other words, these statements confirmed that the Ukrainians had hit the Russian military base in Rostov because on the day of the attack, the air defense system was activated in the Morozovsk region. The military airspace, which served as a base for Russian bombers, was located 3 kilometers from Morozovsk. Therefore, this attack created a lot of risk and panic for the Russian Air Force. Videos showing a flash in the sky in Morozovsk were posted on Telegram. In addition to this attack, another critical situation occurred in Krasnodar. The sounds of drones circulating in the sky of the city woke the residents of the region from their sleep. According to local information sources, numerous drone strikes occurred in Krasnodar at night. The city's air defense systems were activated in response to the threat from the air. The Krasnodar sky groaned with alarm sounds throughout the night. Yevgeny Naumov. This attack damaged an office building and a residential building in Morskaya Street. The nature and extent of the damage is currently under detailed investigation, but it's already been determined that the incident caused serious property damage because the first video footage of the attack showed that big black smoke came out after the explosion. Local residents began to flee in panic after the explosion. Since this city has repeatedly witnessed airstrikes, it was considered normal for Krasnodar residents to want to save their lives in case of other possible airstrikes. Russian law enforcement forces are at the scene and are currently actively participating in the investigation into the circumstances and causes of this unexpected attack. Russian investigators are trying to uncover the details of the incident and determine who might be behind it. Krasnodar Territory Governor Veniamin Kondratyev claimed that there were no injuries or casualties as a result of this incident. Details of the attack have not yet been disclosed. Just one day after this attack, another critical situation occurred in Krasnodar. Residents of the Krasnodar Territory found a kamikaze plane on one of the beaches. Apparently, the drone crashed into the water during its flight. The type of drone has not yet been named, however, although no official statement has been made about this until now. Its design features and dimensions showed that we've had a clear resemblance to the German drone. The drone looked like it had been in the water for quite some time. However, it's still unknown whether the drone was carrying any explosives. Therefore, it's not yet possible to definitively judge what kind of danger this drone poses. It's assumed that the identity of the UAV and the conditions for its appearance on the coast of the Krasnodar Territory will become clear in the near future. It is also suspected that the UAV on the beach in Krasnodar is a Ukrainian drone because this city was attacked by drones the previous day. So this could be the UAV of the Ukrainian forces that hit Krasnodar. Although these claims have not yet been confirmed, the psychological situation in the city has turned into a wreck. Some residents of the Krasnodar region continue to wait quietly while others leave the city. In addition to the attacks in this city, another city of Russia close to the Ukrainian border came under fire. A Russian military factory, 189 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, was engulfed in flames just 2 days after a neighboring area was invaded by pro-Ukrainian forces. The fire took place in the village of Dyatkovo in the north of the Bryansk region. According to local reports, the fire broke out at 8:28 a.m. local time. The fire was extinguished within 45 minutes by emergency teams. The building was used by LLC and PP Alexander, a developer of optical components and systems for space and military equipment, a contractor for the Ministry of Defense. Also last week, 4 Russian military planes crashed in the Bryansk region. A Su-34 fighter bomber, a Su-35 fighter, and 2 Mi-8 helicopters were shot down, Russian news outlet Kommersant reported. All of these offensive actions in Bryansk greatly panicked the residents. When we consider all these attacks, the situation of Russia looks deplorable. Currently, Russian citizens are quite uneasy about this war led by Vladimir Putin. The residents of the Russian region, who became very uneasy with these attacks, began to think that such situations could become much more effective in the future. In fact, Russian citizens were quite right about this, because almost everyday attacks were constantly carried out in different regions of Russia. Also, as we mentioned, Russian cities near Crimea were getting their share from these attacks. Military analysts and war experts report that the Ukrainians have launched a massive expulsion operation on this issue. War experts point to the attacks of the Free Russian Legion group in Belgorod as the starting point of the plan for this operation. In other words, the Ukrainians continued to implement the offensive action plans. They started in Belgorod in the cities of Bryansk, Rostov, and Krasnodar. The next question is which Russian city was involved in the alleged offensive operation plan of the Ukrainian forces. Many experts point to Crimea again as the center of the next attack because this peninsula is seen as the key to the war. Ukrainian leader Zelensky is very sensitive about the retake of Crimea, but it is also possible that Russian cities such as Krasnodar and Belgorod will be attacked again before the Crimea. The reason for this is the reports of intelligence sources. According to some data, the presence of the resistance groups defending the Ukrainian army, both in Krasnodar and in Russian cities such as Belgorod and Bryansk, has greatly increased. People now wanted to end Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine by carrying out acts of sabotage. In addition to these efforts, the airstrikes of the Ukrainian army on the Russian cities, on the border lines, caused the wind of the war to blow in favor of Kiev, because after these striking offensive operations, the Russians began to become very quiet on many front lines in Ukraine. Usually, Russian troops hold defensive positions on the front lines. After seeing that Russian forces were simply incapable of holding off even small assault groups, the Freedom of Russia Legion and Russian Volunteer Corps decided to rapidly increase the scale of their operations. The insurgent forces opened 7 more lines of attack and managed to secure at least 4 settlements, namely Solntsever, Sareta, Marina, and Leninsky. While the fights are taking place in 9 more settlements, including Dubrovka, Shebekino, and Voznesnovka. Combat footage confirms the ongoing operations in multiple settlements. Russian officials were forced to admit that the issue was not resolved and started a massive evacuation. At the moment, Russian forces lost control over 200 kilometers squared of the Belgorod region. The crisis continued to escalate, and more sources started to consider Belgorod as the new front line. The scale of the operation also implies that the losses increase, which is why the commander of the Russian Volunteer Corps asked the head of the Belgorod region to swap prisoners of war. The head of the Belgorod region declined the offer, called them terrorists, and said that he doubted that Russian soldiers were alive anyways. The head of the Wagner Group, Prigozhin, immediately responded by viciously criticizing the decision to basically abandon Russian soldiers and said that it costs nothing to organize a regular prisoner exchange. That happens all the time anyways. Simultaneously, it was revealed that the Russian Ministry of Defense tried to ambush and kill the withdrawing Wagner forces from Bakhmut. Prigozhin said that his troops noticed a strange activity in the rear, and when they checked the roads, it turned out that someone completely mined them, as if planning to take out the whole convoy. Prigozhin said that they demined the area, but when withdrawing, they were hit with artillery fire. That was probably supposed to take out the survivors after the mines detonated. The Wagner forces conducted an internal raid and took captive the artillery crew that fired at them. Later, They showed the video with the commander of the Russian 72nd Brigade that confessed that a group of 12 people under his command fired at Wagner forces. Prigozhin saw an opportunity in all these situations and basically said that for security reasons, he would not report when and where his forces deploy, and that all operations would be conducted at his discretion, bypassing the Russian Ministry of Defense. Prigozhin immediately took action and started redeploying certain elements of his forces to the Belgorod region, claiming that if the Russian ministry could not do its job and protect the Russian people, then he would do it himself. The head of the Chechen Republic, Ramzan Kadyrov, recognized this opportunity as well and also said that he could help. In the meantime, Russian forces started losing Bakhmut. The moment the Wagner Group withdrew from the city and the DPR units became solely responsible for Bakhmut, Ukrainians entered the southwestern part of the city. If you still remember, before withdrawing, Ukrainians made a very prudent decision by blowing up several high-rise buildings exactly in this area. Later, Ukrainian Air Force conducted an airstrike and completely demolished the rest of the buildings that could be used by Russians to protect the southern part of the city. Today, a commander from the Wagner Group confirmed that Ukrainians entered the southern part of the city, which Wagner was previously holding. Russian analysts are extremely worried that Ukrainians will leverage these gains in order to conduct a pincer movement on Kievska and bridge the most formidable strongpoint without even storming it. Today, a fighter from the Adar battalion reported that they are exacerbating the situation by blocking the rotation process with artillery fire. And based on the intercepted radio exchanges, Russians in Kiev may soon abandon their positions from lack of food and sheer exhaustion. However, the biggest news by far comes from the south. Here, Ukrainians launched a series of mechanized assaults during the first stage of the offensive operation. Ukrainians opened 2 lines of attack toward Novogorgievka and Neskikny. Russian sources reported that Ukrainians used up to 2 motorized rifle companies with several T-72 tanks. As a result, Russian defense was breached and Russian troops retreated. Shortly, Ukrainians launched the second stage of the offensive operation and opened 4 lines of attack toward Lavardins, Prutnik, Storozev, and Rivno. Ukrainians once again decided to use small company-sized units for each of their attacks. When it comes to the first 2 attacks, Ukrainians managed to get 3 kilometers deep into the region but ran into mines and decided to retreat in storage of Russian forces, received reinforcements, which they could quickly and easily do because there were a lot of settlements around it. So after a short engagement, Ukrainian forces retreated. Lastly, when it comes to revenge here, Ukrainians got into a trap and faced overwhelming artillery fire. As a result, Ukrainians lost 1 tank and 9 cars. Overall, Ukrainians managed to advance by 2 and in some places by 5 kilometers in 1 day and secure 2 settlements. Right now, Ukrainians need to define approaches to the next settlements on the line and suppress Russian artillery around Rovno. So far, this was just a reconnaissance in-force operation as the assault units were very light. Ukrainians also did not use seasoned assault units and heavy Western equipment, and they still managed to slice off multiple kilometers in one go. Thanks you for watching us.